What's going on, Center City Church?
You already know.
We are so excited that you chose to join us for
Yeah.
You Already Know. And I was thinking this week to maybe give everybody a little idea of what we actually do here on this podcast or whatever the heck it is for 5 to 10 minutes. Our hope is just to give you a little bit of a deeper dive into what Sunday morning's message was and maybe give you a little insight into the way our brains think. And, in sermon writing, I'm actually teaching a class in homiletics right now. And one of the thoughts that always come
You
to my
can
head.
call him Professor John from now on.
I mean, you can. I don't know if I would answer it, but
Still shortens to PJ.
yeah, now that you say that, I guess that works. Is one of the things that I've always appreciated about sermon writing is not just the stuff that we get to communicate, but the stuff that makes it on the cutting room floor, just some of those little truths. And my hope sometimes is that this 10-minute time of us just kind of exploring one idea a little bit deeper gives you a chance to see some of that. So, yeah, I'm excited about our time together today.
Me too. And I do want to dive into that, but I want to just stop before we do anything else and celebrate that we had an incredible Sunday.
Yeah, we did.
And we had 3 people baptized. It was special.
It was, and you might get a little bit of a type or crop because there's legitimately a baptismal tank in front of us, but it's always exciting to see these moments where people are celebrating and making this public proclamation of what God has done. And there was a little bit of a theme that developed among our baptism candidates that they just kind of all came back to this. Was waiting to some degree, thought I had to be perfect, but I've just realized that God accepts me as I am, and this is just my next step in the process, and I thought that was beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely teared up, but I tear up at every baptism, but it was awesome, and I love the way that this community celebrates together.
Yeah.
I mean, people get into it, and that's so much fun.
Yeah, even the third baptism kind of came late. Like they were a little hesitant and didn't exactly know what to do. It's on us. But the moment they were like, we want to get baptized, we had half the room just sticking around, waiting, celebrating and worship. And the moment she walked in, it was like she was a rock star.
I
It
know,
was an
she
awesome
is a
moment.
rock star.
Absolutely. It was a great moment.
It was a great moment. And I love the theme because I think we're kind of seeing with a lot of us in the room that this idea of promises and God promising things and us needing to wait on his timing, but maybe striving too hard, that idea of trying to be perfect, trying to fix ourselves, it's something that you've been talking about, and it's really been hitting a lot of people in our church family really personally. So I think that was reflected in the stories of the people getting baptized.
Absolutely. I want to be a part of a church where we can come from a place of reality. Like no one's trying hard to fake the hard things of the faith. And this series, which is kind of like all about the promises of God, you would think is like super uplifting, and not that it's not, but it also stirs some things up, specifically when we talk about waiting. And it's been incredible to see the people and their real response, the community just as a whole, their real response to how God and worked with Abraham and Sarah and what that looked like and some of the things they can hold on to in seasons of waiting.
Yeah, you talked about something, we've already talked about it this morning, but this idea that wasn't actually in your notes for the message, but when you spoke it, I know it hit me, but this idea that we talked about Sarah, and God had given Abraham and Sarah this promise that they would have a child. And this idea that it wasn't that she thought that God couldn't do it, but that she didn't believe that God would do it through her. I just want to kind of sit on that for a minute and unpack what that means for what it meant for her, but also what that means for us.
Yeah, I think for so many of us, I don't know if it's being beat down by our past or beat down by the thoughts in our head. I often feel like the greatest enemy to what God is doing in us is our own thought process and thought life, really. And the unhealthy nature of that, specifically in Sarai, before the transformation, was when God said, I'm going to do this thing in you, and gives her the promise. She instantly started thinking about how old she was and how she was well past her prime and how this vessel that God was going to put the promise in couldn't hold it. Like there was just physically something about her that she was thinking would limit what God wanted to do. And then she started thinking about her husband. So again, to your point, it wasn't that she didn't trust that God can do it. It just wasn't in her. And I do feel like we carry ourselves like that sometimes. If you ask me to pray for your healing, I can have faith that God can heal you. If you ask me to pray for that promise in you, I can have faith that God will do the promise in you. But the moment I consider God's promise in my own life, I have a tendency of reverting back to my own limitations, my own history, my own scars. And the beauty of a baptismal tank is a reminder that God takes all things and he takes what's old and he makes it new. He brings to life what was dead. And I personally think he takes pleasure in taking your doubt and transforming it into joy, not just for your sake, but again, that other people can see, no, God takes flawed people. It's one of the dangers, I feel like, of a church that projects perfection. We limit the gospel from reaching people who aren't perfect. And by the way,
That's everyone.
that's everyone. That's everyone from the pastor around, like from the people on the stage to the people in small groups to the people in leadership. All of us are flawed. And when we try to cover up that perfection, try to cover that up with a false sense of perfection, it limits people from hearing the gospel that's tangible to the broken. So to the person who feels like they're past their prime, you're in a perfect position for a miracle. For the person who feels like their scars are keeping them, you're in a perfect position for a miracle. And that's what I love about the story of Abraham and Sarah.
Yeah, and what I love too, that kind of messes me up a little bit, if I'm honest, just the implications of it, is Sarah never had to be on board with God using her for God to use her and fulfill his promise. Like, that messes with your head.
Yeah, it's challenging because so much of our faith is built on this false expectation that it's about my effort, when it really is about his grace. Now, hear me, because I want to make sure I'm really clear with this. If they were living in absolute contrary nature to what God was saying, like what you find in Abraham and Sarah is really, it's sloppy obedience. I'm trying my hardest to interpret and doing the best that I can, but it's still obedience. And I do feel like God honors that obedience without a doubt. But you're right. Like, regardless how you think about it, they lived what they knew, and God still showed up even in areas that they doubted.
Yeah, that's true. They could have gotten to a point where she was like, nope, I'm out of here. I'm going back home. And that wouldn't be the same as her just being like, I don't know if I fully believe this or am capable of believing this, and God continuing to show up.
But I do want to make sure that we push back here to this idea of sloppy obedience. And that's probably a bad term. And
I
it's not
actually
like
like it a lot.
You are responsible to do what you know. And I think that the onus of that is on me as a believer. Like, I want to make sure that I'm honoring God to do everything he's told me to do. Now, because of my humanity, there's moments where I've misinterpreted, I didn't understand. I do think Abraham and Sarah were both thinking the best. You know, like we talked about Sarah handing over her servant to Abraham. That was a very cultural response to the moment. It wasn't the right response, but they still felt like they were participating in the promise, although it was directly against what God was trying to do. So again, to that sloppy obedience, which is a tough concept to grab a hold of, specifically if we think that the weight of our salvation is based off getting it right. But it's not. So we should be okay with the idea that I'm going to fail sometimes.
Yeah. And you kind of segued very nicely to talking about this idea of timing.
Yes.
Because what we see with Sarah and Abraham when it comes to Ishmael is a lot of that was them, believing that God was going to do what he said, but not understanding why it was taking so long and kind of trying to maybe speed the process up a little bit. And so you talked about timing, honestly, in a way that is still beyond my capacity to fully grasp, because God is beyond our capacity to fully grasp.
Absolutely.
Will you talk a little bit about this Alpha and Omega concept and how God exists outside of our time?
Yeah, so in Genesis 21, this is kind of the verse that kicked the thought off. The Lord kept his word and did for Sarah exactly what he had promised. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son. This happened, and this is verse 2, this happened at just the time God said it would. So when it comes to our time, it's incumbent on us to make sure that we do the right thing in order to make it happen. And Abraham and Sarah kind of share an example of what it looks like to mess everything up because we thought it was supposed to happen at our time. When it comes to their time, meaning the expectations of others, we're left unfulfilled because we're always either late or we're going to be early because expectations are strange and it's other people and they're human. But when it's God's time, it's perfect timing. So to push to that passage in Revelation where he says he's the Alpha and Omega, whenever you see that terminology used in the Greek together with Alpha and Omega, it not just symbolizes the beginning and the end, it also symbolizes a dominion over beginning and the end, meaning God lives outside of our context of time. He lives above linear time, where we're kind of stuck in this world where time happens to us, God happens to time. And that means that he's...
I get it, and yet I don't get it.
Which is tough because, again, this is so much a part of our limitation. Just a little pause here. If we can honestly say, I know everything about God, we don't need him. So there is parts that I hope this makes your faith struggle because really, we're not going to get a glimpse of this on this side of heaven. But the beauty of God means that he lives above what limits us in limited time, in linear time. I can only live in the present. I am a slave to what happened yesterday. I can only hope for what will happen tomorrow, but I can only live in this one moment. Now, there's some wisdom in learning from yesterday and being hopeful for tomorrow. Don't get me wrong, but I can only live in a moment, whereas he lives above the moments. So that means he can work in your yesterday to bring healing. Now, we see that present in people's lives. We see God work in us right now to fix our yesterday. He's able to work in your yesterday to fix your today, but also work in tomorrow to prepare it. And that's the beauty of the gospel as a whole, that we have a God who loves us so much that based off our decision to fall on our knees and accept his sacrifice, that he's able to heal our yesterday and prepare our tomorrow. We talk about it all the time in this verbiage, that we would become wide awake to his love, healing our yesterday, fully alive to our promise, preparing our tomorrow. And it's again, back to the baptismal tank. What God does in a moment changes everything because he's working in yesterday to heal us, but he's also working in tomorrow to prepare a way. And it's one of the things about God that mystifies me, but really that it allows me to trust him even more, because in his perfect timing, he knew, he knows, he will always know what you need, when you need it, and how it's to be done.
Absolutely. Now I'm so excited about where we're headed next.
Yes.
Will you give just a little teaser?
I'm stewarding the promise. So, God, I believe the promise for my life is that I would have this incredible career, and that we line these things all up. You would line things like, I feel like that's your promise for my life. And then you get the job. You get the finances start lining up. The right relationship lines up. Stewarding the promise can be sometimes more disorienting than even waiting for the promise. Specifically in that new, now what do I do with this promise?
Yeah, especially if you've waited for a lifetime, you get good at it or you get used to it.
Absolutely. Now you have Abraham living in the promise finally, and the first thing God says is, give me the promise back. This will mess your theology up. This will mess up your parenting structure, like if you think about it. But chapter 22, I believe, is one of the fundamental passages that just to orient your faith, how to best steward the promise. Because often the promise becomes the idol if you're not careful. And this is really just a story of a man struggling to make sure that the promise keeper is the one his life is set and oriented around, not the promise. And it's going to be fun. I can't wait.
I can't wait either. We are so excited about Sunday. If you are watching this and you are a multiplier, don't forget that we have lunch right afterwards. If you're watching this and you're not a multiplier yet, but you just want to learn what we're talking about, right here in YouTube, just click on our page, go to the playlist Multipliers. Even if you end up deciding that you don't want to commit to being all in heart and soul, it's a great series of lessons on what it means to live out of your identity in God. We talk about your giftings, talk about your purpose. You will not be wasting your time. And then if you get it done by next Sunday, email hello@centercity.church and let us know, and join us for lunch.
Yeah, I can't wait. It's going to be a lot of fun celebrating all that God's done in the last 2 years.
Man, it's a lot. We've started looking up some of
Sheesh.
those actual like numbers, and it's exciting.
I think you'll be floored. I know I was as Pastor Ashley came back with some of the reports, and it's amazing to see what God's done, even in the middle of a worldwide pandemic, to see what he's done with this community in West Charlotte. I'm really excited about it. And then we got some really exciting news.
we do.
Some kind of, I don't know, ground shaking news is probably, I don't want to oversell it, but it's exciting. We're really excited about it, so we can't wait to share that with you.
Yeah, so we'll see you on Sunday. Have a great week.